Welcome to the Moser On Manufacturing podcast, brought to you by Jacket Media Co.
I'm just wild about Harry, and Harry's wild about me.
Welcome, everybody, to Manufacturing Talk Radio. I'm Lou Weiss, and I'm here today with Harry Moser, who is the president and founder of Reshoring Initiative. And we're going to be talking about Harry's total cost of ownership as in regards to reshoring and onshoring, and the whole mess of what's going on in terms of where we are at with reshoring. So, Harry, it's your floor.
Thank you. Actually, it's your microphone maybe, but my floor at the moment. The the work went offshore because the wages, the prices were so much lower, and but if companies do the math correctly, if they look at the total cost instead of just the wage or the price, in 20 or 30% of the cases, they'll see they can be more profitable bringing the work back.
The problem with that is that manufacturers who are very smart at making things and building things and knowing how to sell things, they may not necessarily, or their CFOs may not necessarily be up to speed in terms of being able to determine what the total cost of ownership is. But I know you have the fix.
Of course. So first, a definition of total cost of ownership, and it's to look at all the costs and all the risks, and risks are getting bigger all the time. So all the costs and all the risks, instead of just the wage rate or just the price, the factory price, and the difference again is 20 or 30%. So you're really inaccurate if you only look at the price. So what companies should do and why they should use it. First, it helps them make more accurate decisions, both on buying, where should I buy the product, where should I, or there or here, and where should I put a factory? Should I put the factory there? Should I put the factory here? So an very interesting case, a good friend of mine, a Professor John Gray at the Ohio State University Business School, he found 4 companies, medium-sized companies, that had offshored and then reshored. And he did a study of them, like professors do, and he said, why'd you offshore? They said the price was so much lower, the wage rates were so much lower, it saved a ton of money. Well, then why'd you reshore? Well, over 5 years, we found some duty, freight, carrying cost of having too much inventory, travel costs, intellectual property risk, the problems of communication between engineering and manufacturing. You put all those things together, and the price wasn't worth it. And so we brought it back.
What about quality?
And quality, it depends. If you're getting it perhaps from China or Indonesia, a quality difference. If you're getting it from Germany or Switzerland, probably not a quality difference.
Right. But Germany, of course, is not exactly one of the cheaper venues.
Although I've run into a lot of people that tell me that at least in machined products, they can get the part cheaper in Germany than here.
Is that right? That's interesting.
They're more productive. They have better apprentices. They automate better. They buy more robots.
Interesting. I think Japan is probably the king of robots.
Yeah, actually, I think maybe South Korea is, I think, but then Japan, Germany, China has more robots per 1,000 workers than the U.S. has.
Is that right?
So their productivity is rising at about 6 or 7% per year, and ours is rising at less than 1% a year.
It hasn't helped their economy as of recent, China.
Well, their economy overall is dramatically better than 20 years ago.
Yes, absolutely.
Record rate of improvement. So they've done very well, and they're smart enough and aggressive enough and long-term enough to keep investing, whereas American companies when things are good, they tend to invest, and when they aren't good, they tend to not
Right,
invest. And the
right.
Germans and the Chinese, they sort of just keep investing, growing and growing.
Correct, correct. So the cost of total cost of ownership, they had a problem this past year, year and a half, with regards to COVID and shortage of containers and shortage of truck drivers. So you were paying exorbitant fees. For example, a container prior to COVID was about $3,500, and it went up to $20,000. It's now back down again, but during that period of time, the cost of ownership must have soared.
It did, and obviously it depends a lot on what the product is. If you're shipping
Yes.
something that's high value and not very big and not very heavy, well, then not so important. But if it's steel or something that's a lot of space, not much labor content, then
Right.
that freight cost was knocking it out of the market. But that's one of those pieces of total cost.
So if somebody was going to look to reshore after they've made a determination of costs, first they would have to determine what those costs were. So you want to tell us about total cost of ownership estimator?
Okay, so the TCO estimator is free online on our website. You have to go there, sign up, sign in, and it's at www.reshorenow.org. That's where you'll find it, and essentially you answer a bunch of questions. The user answers questions. You tell us what kind of thing you're bringing back, and then there's two columns, one for the US, one for the other country, and you answer questions. Some you give the same answer in both, like how much does it weigh, how many are you going to buy a year, things like that. And others are different, like how frequently are you going to receive them? So if it's a local factory, like somebody buying from you, they might get forgings every week. Whereas if they're coming in from offshore, they might get them once a month or once a quarter, and they fill a container. And that then changes what the inventory will be. So they answer a series of questions, about 29 questions, and then the algorithms take those and do calculations, and come up with about 27 costs and risks that are quantified as a cost per piece, and then totaled to tell you what the total is, and then a forecast into the future, because we ask the user what they expect the rate of wage increases will be in each country, and then it goes in and estimates what will happen in the future. So we tell them where you are now, where you think you're going to be in the future, so the company can make a better decision.
So they must come up with, you come up with a differential of between 20 and 30%. Is that correct?
Let's say from the data that we have of 180 cases of China versus the US, I'm going to show you a slide here.
Yeah, good.
Okay, I'm going to get you to a slide. Tell me when that comes up.
You're on.
Okay, so first, this slide is a study that we did with Plant and Moran, one of the largest consulting and auditing companies, and we asked manufacturers and distributors, to the extent that you buy product or material components offshore, why do you do that? Why don't you get them locally? And you can see the big bar on the left. Overwhelmingly, they said it was price. They go offshore for price. So,
Right.
sort of elevator speech, about 70% of the decision to offshore is driven by price.
Correct.
And the price difference is substantial. So if you see in this next slide, I took 190 cases, China versus the US, and the horizontal axis is China price percentage of US, and you can see the peak of the distribution is around 70. So China price on average is about 30% less than US price. So that's a lot. If you're a company, that's hard to ignore if all you're going to do is look at the price. So what we offer them is the total cost of ownership estimator, okay, in which they take that price and they calculate the total cost. They add in all these other 28 factors. And so in this chart, the red circle is the Chinese price, factory price, and the blue triangle is the US price. So in this case, 70 and 100, there's a 30% difference. And then the red rectangle is the China TCO, and the diamond is the US TCO. So you can see we've gone from a 30% difference down to a 10% difference, and then it forecasts both of them off into the future based on the expected rate of wage increase in each country. And so in this case, we would hope that the purchaser would say, first they were going to say, if they just looked at price, of course I'm going to send that new thing off to China and have it made. 30%, I'll get my bonus, big savings, I'm a hero kind of thing. Huh? But if they look at TCO, they say, not so clear anymore. And pretty soon the product should be made here. So we should stop sending more things off, and we should be starting planning to bring things back. And if there's forgings there, we ought to be calling Lou and say, Lou, can you make some forgings for us starting in a couple of months?
Right. In your TCO, have you included the tariff issue with regards to China?
First, there's duty, which is the traditional 2, 3, 4% duty, and there's blank spaces for them to add it in. In the revised copy, the revised version of TCO Estimator, which hopefully will come out in 2 months, we definitely have what's called Section 301 tariffs, which are these 25% tariffs, and 25%. If you're buying anything, 25% makes a huge difference. And so we're going to have Section 301 tariffs. We're going to have ESG, environmental, social, and governance. So for a typical metal product, by making it here instead of making it there and shipping it here, you reduce the environmental load by about 25%, even 50%, depending on the product.
Yeah.
And in terms of social, every $200,000 worth of work you bring back, that's one American job. So that's a social benefit for your country. And so we're going to have a method to calculate that and say what value you're bringing to the country. So we're going to have Section 301, ESG, and then a section on risk, on geopolitical risk. So the probability of something going wrong with China, specifically over Taiwan, has been rising over the last couple of years. We have a study that was done by of a bunch of geopoliticians, political scientists kind of people. And from that, we concluded the probability is maybe 3.5% per year that there's war over there. And you might say 3.5%, that's not very much. But then over the next 5 years, that's 17.5%. That starts to sound like a lot.
Right.
And if you're a company and every one of your products, every one of your factories, all your suppliers are getting components from China, and all of a sudden they all stop, and not for a week or a month, but maybe for 6 months or a year or 5 years, will you still be in business? And when you find out you're not getting your components from offshore, and you call somebody like Lou and say, Lou, I need $5 million per week of work coming out starting next month. But we don't have any tooling, but we need you to do that. Can you do that? You can say no. And by the way, you're the thousandth call I've had today since the war started yesterday. So we say, and a lot of people on Wall Street are saying, that U.S. manufacturing companies should treat getting out of China as a form of insurance. Just like you have fire insurance, flood insurance, what have you, you should have China insurance. And the way you pay for that is to pay a little bit more, not much more if you use total cost, but a little bit more to bring the work back here, so you have that access to that component, so you'll be able to ship to your customers, you'll have your revenue, you'll be able to pay your people.
Right. And there is one point that I'd like to bring out, because there's a popular misconception about the China tariff. The 25% that you spoke of is that China does not pay that tariff. The U.S. customer who is buying the goods from China is the one paying the tariff. So XYZ company buys from China at whatever the price is, then we here, U.S. customers, have to pay the U.S. government 25%.
The importer pays the tariff.
That's right.
The importer pays the tariff. Now, I've seen studies of products that were subject to the tariff that showed that the U.S. price for that product category did not rise after the tariffs went into effect. And so I believe that the Chinese supplier is probably eating half the tariff. If the tariff's 25%, I'll bet the Chinese selling price comes down by 10 to 15%, because otherwise the customer is going to say, no, I'm not going to buy from you anymore.
Right. Well, that's true, and I've heard that as well. And I've also heard that there are times where import documentation is not exactly the way the real numbers are.
Yeah, and sometimes they'll ship the product through Vietnam or Cambodia or Thailand or somewhere else, and all of a sudden it's a Thai product instead of a Chinese product. I've got an interesting quote on total cost. I was just actually talking today to GE Appliances, and they're one of the original reshoring stories. They brought 2 or 3 different product categories back from China and made them in Louisville and turned around the Louisville factory. It's been just a great success. And there's a quote from Kevin Nolan, who's the CEO of GE Appliances. And I'm going to read this to you. He said, "I've always said this is just economics. People are going to realize that the savings they thought they had are not real, and it's going to be better and cheaper to make them here." So he's talking about total cost of ownership, that if you just look at the price, you're not seeing the whole picture. When you see the whole picture, you'll decide in many cases that you ought to be making the product here.
That's well said. And for those late listeners, you want to give us that URL again so they can go to the TCO estimator?
I guess I'm willing to do that. So it's www.reshorenow.org, and you'll find there, you can email me, you can find the phone number. So I'd love to hear from people either that have succeeded in reshoring, because the only way we know that 360,000 jobs were announced coming back last year is because we find that out. And you can help us by telling what you've reshored, either as, say, an OEM, a buyer, or as a supplier, someone who sells to that OEM. So tell us about your successes, or ask us for help in having some more successes in the future, getting some more business. As an example of that, a company outside Chicago came to me about 5 years ago, Morey Corp, Morey Corp, Woodridge, Illinois. They make printed circuit boards, populate the circuit boards.
Right.
And they were about to lose a big order to China. The Chinese competitor offered a lower price to the customer. And so I helped Morey do this TCO calculation, showed the customer that even though Morey's price was higher, the TCO to the customer was lower. And that was the key to winning a $60 million order. So everybody out there, I'd love to help you win a $1 million, a $100,000 order. So the tools there to use. I'm here to help. Let's bring some jobs back together.
Correct me if I'm wrong. Your TCO estimator is free to use.
Free to use, yeah. And I'd like to see it used more. I mean, it gets used a lot, but it's not used. It could be used 10 times as much and bring back 10 times as many jobs.
Harry, we're going to have to talk about the TCO estimator, and perhaps as a Benny to your organization, and perhaps we ought to put it on Manufacturing Talk Radio website, where we have tens of thousands of people coming that they'll see what this is all about. They'll go to you, they'll come to me, they'll sign up and be able to benefit and see the benefit of perhaps reshoring.
Yeah, I certainly having a link from there and a description would be great. just a last sort of a quote. Many of you will have heard of W. Edwards Deming, who was the father of quality. And he helped the Japanese learn quality, and then we learned from him and from the Japanese. And
Right.
his fourth principle of management, quote, stop buying on the basis of price, instead minimize total cost. Here's a guy who's seen as a genius, a guy who turned around industries. And he said, look at the total cost, not the price.
It goes right to the bottom line.
Yep.
And that's a quote from me. Harry, any final words before we wrap up this segment?
Well, it's always good to work with you, Lou, and it's good to hear or to be heard by and eventually to hear from the audience. Again, we're here to help. I want to know your successes, want to help you with more successes.
Harry, thank you very much. And we're going to do part 2 of this next month, and we'll be sending out an email to all of our listeners and the transients that come through. This is part 2. And if you only come in on part 2, you can always listen to part 1 on our website. Harry, maybe you ought to put us on your website, do a swap. So that said, Harry,
we can make that work. Now, by the way, for everybody out there, I'm still wearing the Manufacturing is Cool t-shirt. So for those who are young enough to still pick a career, or those who have children or nephews and nieces and so on that have to make that decision, manufacturing is a great career and will be an even better one as you bring more jobs back to the country.
Manufacturing is cool today. It is cool. Harry, thank you very much, and we'll see you next month.
Thank you, Lou. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye now.
I'm just wild about Harry, and